very lucky to have as very much a friend, an associate of Sun News, David Harris, a former senior figure at the CSIS, now in private security and intelligence. He joins us now from Ottawa. David, welcome to you.
Thank you, Michael.
I want to start off by talking about not that it really is completely relevant, but the reasons for the murders, the protests, the ongoing demonstrations in the Middle East. Because a lot of people are saying it's all about some film that was made in California. If it was, couldn't care less. However, we believe at Sun News, and if we could find this out, I don't know why other networks couldn't as well, we believe there's a far deeper reason here. We're going to show you now a clip from an interview, not done by us, many hours before the attacks took place in Libya and Egypt. Have a look at this, please.
Zawahiri leads me to a protest outside the US Embassy.
And this is the protest calling for the release of Sheikh Abdul Rahman.
The so-called blind sheikh, jailed for his part in the 1993 World Trade Center attack in New York. We meet the sheikh's son.
And when you call for prisoners to be released as part of your document, you're talking about Sheikh Abdul Rahman.
Of course.
Yeah.
The first one we are calling.
The first one.
Now, that is the day that the attacks took place in Egypt and the murders took place in Libya. There are now demonstrations in Yemen, in Iran, outside various embassies as well. And that is very specific. They're calling for the release of this man, this murderer who's been in prison for many years in the United States, as is the president of Egypt. David, it seems to us that the movie in California was a mere premise, an ostensible reason. These protests and demonstrations were planned long before.
Yes, I mean, it's clearly a very complicated situation. Look at Libya, for starters. It seems now people are generally accepting that this was a well-organized, much-anticipated terrorist assault, perhaps very specifically targeting the ambassador who was ultimately murdered in it, and that it could have had very little, if anything, conceivable to do with any real or imagined offense taken to the California film. But getting back to Egypt, yes, the issue of Rahman is quite something. And in that clip, the understating of the significance of Rahman and what any kind of sympathy for him by the Egyptian president or others, and the Egyptian president has been very sympathetic to him, tells us about what is going on in what passes for governance in Egypt and a good part of the Muslim Brotherhood-dominated North Africa and the Middle East. For Mr. Rahman, who, as you note, has been sentenced, probably for all eternity, to prison in the United States, was complicit in the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. But he was also implicated very clearly in the monuments plot. So this was an extremely grave threat to the United States and specifically the New York, Manhattan area, an affront to the United Nations, and possibly to include the blowing up of underwater tunnels, which could have been catastrophic in the extreme. Beyond that, during his time in prison, he has actually been shown to have attempted to give orders to extremists in the Middle East to undertake operations against civilians and others. You might remember that his own lawyer was actually implicated, an ostensible human rights lawyer at that, in facilitating the passing of his messages to his confreres elsewhere. So this is an unbelievable, inexcusable kind of character and situation, yet this new harbinger of democracy, Mr. Morsi, president of Egypt, has made as just about his first priority upon reaching office the liberating, the freeing of Mr. Rahman from American prison. So it should hardly surprise us that we now see downstream effects possibly involving coordinated efforts, maybe implicating the Egyptian government directly, in violence against the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. And of course, we're also seeing upsurges in relation to the U.S. Embassy in Yemen.
Yes. There is a difference between these two countries. We know that President Barack Obama, in dealing with the Libyan leadership, even though an ambassador was murdered there, has said to them, we accept your apology, we know it wasn't you. We're told he played very hardball with the leaders of Egypt. Now, we also know in Libya that there was apparently a group of US Marines and Libyan Special Forces on the way to help, and they were ambushed very professionally, and they said the mortar fire we came under was not a bunch of revolutionaries. This was organized, and they were very well trained. We've also heard, we have no idea if it's true or not, but there are two reports that are coming out that the US ambassador, this is quite grotesque, but may have been sodomized before he was killed. That's not confirmed, but it will be entirely in keeping with past Islamic crimes in the region. But the Egyptian government is different. Egypt, unlike Libya, is a very significant player in the region, in the world. And the government, rather than apologizing for the attacks, has actually condemned the making of the movie and told the Americans they have to stop provoking Muslims.
Wasn't that astonishing? But in effect, I suppose he was only taking a leaf out of the Obama White House's own press release, as you recall, issued by the U.S. Embassy Cairo immediately before the violence broke out, when they were, in effect, sympathizing with what is frequently described as the Muslim victimhood narrative, a most misleading narrative that tends to portray Muslims all over everywhere as being the victim of hate crimes. And this in the teeth of efforts being made by genuinely moderate Muslims to put paid to these lies, which of course are only inciting violence of the sort we're seeing. So this is a very serious kind of situation, and it's surprising that the United States would have any part, that the State Department might have been enculturated, if we can go sociological on this, to have as their first instinct any kind of apologetic reference to the exercise, however disgusting, frankly, of First Amendment rights in relation to a film that may or may not have been offensive to many people. It's absolutely extraordinary, and this goes to the heart of the U.S. Constitution. And remember, as you know, First Amendment, the freedom in many ways above all others that allows people to protect their other rights. If they can't speak freely and straightforwardly about concerns, they cannot really see to it that their broader constitutional rights and liberties are going to be respected. We don't want those rights to be in the hands of whichever is the most radical extremist in the world who will take offense at derivative practice.
Well said, well said. As always, my friend, a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.